My name is Detective Morgan Reeves, and this recording is my confession. By the time you hear this, I'll likely be gone. Not dead, something worse, erased. Like the 26 children no one remembers but me. 3 weeks ago, 7-year-old Ellie Prescott vanished from her locked bedroom. No forced entry, no struggle. Just an empty bed and a red crayon placed precisely on her pillow. The color she'd refused to touch because she claimed it screams when you color with it. I thought it was just another missing child case. I was wrong. The security camera outside her window caught something the human eye can't process. A door materializing in her bedroom wall at exactly 3:33 a.m. I've enhanced the footage frame by frame. In the millisecond before the camera fails, you can see Ellie walking toward it, hand outstretched, eyes reflecting something impossible. She was the first this cycle. 5 more children disappeared in the same way before I understood what was happening. My hands are shaking as I record this. 10 minutes ago, my radio turned itself on. Through bursts of static, I heard Ellie's voice, but changed, hollow. He knows you're making this recording, detective. He's coming for you next. Adults aren't supposed to see the door. Then my phone received a text from my own number. A photo of me sitting in this room, taken from inside my walls, with a single word, soon. I can hear it now, whispering behind my drywall, scratching. A red stain is spreading across my bedroom wall, forming a spiral pattern around what looks like the outline of a door. What I'm about to tell you sounds insane, but I've gathered evidence from police archives dating back to 1843. Every 40 years, 7 children disappear in this town. No one remembers them after a year passes, not even their parents. Except this cycle is different. This entity, whatever it is, made a mistake when it took Ellie Prescott. It took a child who was being live-streamed by her mother's nanny cam. For 12 seconds, before the feed cut out, thousands watched that door appear. They saw what reached through it. Now the pattern is broken, and it's angry. If you're watching this, you're already part of it. It spreads through awareness, like a mimetic infection. I'm sorry, but if enough people remember, maybe we can stop it. Maybe we can save the 6 children already taken. And the 7th, the one it still needs. That child could be watching right now. I shouldn't have taken the case. 15 years working homicide had taught me to trust my instincts, and everything about the Prescott disappearance felt wrong from the start. But when Police Chief Davis called me at 3:33 a.m., something in his voice made my skin crawl. The timestamp on my phone burned into my retinas. 3:33 a.m. exactly. Not 3:32, not 3:34. Morgan, this is the 3rd child this month. Same pattern, same oddities. His voice cracked on that last word. Davis was a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything from serial killers to child trafficking rings. Nothing shook him. Until now. I arrived at the Prescott home as dawn broke. The pink light making the suburban house look deceptively peaceful. Mrs. Prescott clutched her daughter's stuffed rabbit, knuckles white, eyes vacant. Mr. Prescott couldn't stop pacing. 5 steps one way, 5 steps back, like a man trapped in a cell of his own making. She was afraid of something, Mrs. Prescott whispered when I interviewed her. For weeks, said she heard whispering in her walls. The hair on my arms rose. The same detail had appeared in the other case files. Children hearing voices from inside their walls. Children have active imaginations, I offered, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Mrs. Prescott's eyes snapped to mine, suddenly focused and blazing. She recorded it. My heart stuttered. Recorded what exactly? The whispering, on her little pink tape recorder. She wanted to prove to us she wasn't making it up. Mrs. Prescott fumbled with her phone, hands trembling. I didn't listen to it until this morning. I thought she was just being... She pressed play and held the phone between us. What I heard turns my blood to ice even now, months later. A child's voice, Ellie, speaking first. "Hello, can you hear me? I'm recording you now." Silence for 10 seconds, then whispering, not from a human throat. The sound reminded me of radio interference, but with unmistakable words buried in the static. "We've been waiting for you, Ellie, for so long. The door is almost open." "What door?" Ellie's small voice asked. "The one in your dreams, the red one. We need your help to open it the rest of the way." "I don't like red." "We will. Everyone does eventually." Recording ended. Mrs. Prescott stared at me, tears streaming silently down her face. What took my baby? I had no answer then. I wish I still didn't. The investigation consumed me. 3 children missing in 1 month, all within a 5-mile radius. All reported hearing whispers from their walls in the weeks before disappearing. All had drawn the same strange symbol in their school notebooks. A spiral inside a crudely rendered door. When I requested security footage from the neighbors' cameras, tech reported severe corruption in all files from 3:30 to 3:35 a.m., except for fragments. Milliseconds of footage showing something that defied explanation. A door appearing in bedroom walls where no door existed. A dark shape reaching through. My colleagues treated these anomalies as technical glitches, digital artifacts, but I couldn't unsee what I'd glimpsed in those corrupted frames. I visited each bedroom, inspecting every inch. In each one, I found a single red crayon left behind. And in each home, when I pressed my ear to the walls at night, I heard nothing. Until 3:33 a.m. precisely, when the faintest whispers emerged from within the drywall itself. My partner, Detective Santos, found me in the Torres home at 4 a.m., ear pressed against the wall, recorder in hand. "Jesus, Morgan, what are you doing?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "Listen to this," I said, playing back the recording. Nothing but static came through. Santos shook his head. "You need sleep, man. You're chasing ghosts." But I'd heard it clearly when recording. Voices discussing which child would be next. Voices that existed only at 3:33 a.m. and erased themselves from digital media afterward. My colleagues thought I was obsessed, maybe cracking under pressure. Maybe I was. I stopped sleeping, instead spending nights in my car outside the homes of families with children in the neighborhood, watching, waiting. On the 7th night, I nodded off around 3:20 a.m. and jerked awake to my car radio blasting static at precisely 3:33. Through the hissing interference came that same whispered voice. "She's not enough. We need more to keep the door open. You can't stop it, detective. You can only choose who goes next." My phone rang immediately after. Another child gone. 8-year-old Michael Torres. When I arrived at the Torres home, the pattern had changed. Instead of a red crayon, there was a small tape recorder on Michael's pillow. With dread crushing my chest, I pressed play. A child's laughter echoed from the speaker, but wrong somehow, played in reverse perhaps, or at an inhuman pitch. Then Ellie Prescott's voice, distinctly hers but flat, emotionless. "The door is open now, but it's hungry. It needs more children to stay open. Only children can see the true path. Adults are too, used up. Detective Reeves is watching, but he won't understand until it's too late, until he sees the door himself." I dropped the recorder like it had burned me. How did it know my name? How could Ellie know I was assigned to her case? That night, I dreamed of a red door standing alone in a field of static. It opened a crack, and through it, I glimpsed children walking in a procession, following a figure I couldn't quite see. I woke to find a red crayon clutched in my hand. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Local historian Eleanor Blackwood contacted me after seeing the news reports. She recognized the spiral door symbol from her research. "This town has a pattern," she told me, in her cluttered office, filled with archival materials. Every 40 years going back to the founding in 1843. Children disappear for exactly 27 days. 7 children each cycle. She spread newspapers across her desk. Yellowed articles from 1983, 1943, 1903, and beyond. The same story repeating through time. "Here's what no one notices," she continued, tapping a particular headline from 1983. "Sixth child still missing. Search called off." "Sixth?" I asked. "Not seventh?" "Never seven. Always six. Because by the time the seventh disappears, people have already started to forget the first ones. Look at these follow-up articles." She showed me news stories from weeks after each cycle. Interviews with community members who seemed confused about the details. Parents who referred to having always been childless. Police reports where names were redacted or changed. It's as if once the 7th child is taken, reality itself is rewritten, Eleanor whispered, except for a handful of people who remember the truth. "That's impossible," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I thought of the officers who'd worked the first case with me, how they now referred to it as a runaway rather than an abduction, how Ellie's room had been converted to a home office when I'd visited last week, with Mrs. Prescott confused about why I'd come. "There were rumours back in the early days," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to a whisper as if afraid of being overheard. "The original settlers built the town's first radio tower on land the native people had marked as forbidden. They said it was a thin place where barriers between worlds weren't solid. You can't seriously believe. I've lived through 2 cycles, Detective." Her eyes held mine, unflinching. "In 1983, my best friend was the 6th child taken. The night before she vanished, she called me, said there were people in her walls who spoke backward. I heard them through the phone." Eleanor slid a worn journal towards me. "This belonged to Dr. Lawrence Pierce, a psychiatrist who studied the 1943 disappearances. He believed that children weren't being taken. They were being called, and they went willingly." I opened the journal with trembling fingers. Pages of meticulous notes, detailed interviews with families, transcripts of strange recordings, and theories that grew increasingly disturbing. Dr. Pierce had eventually discovered a pattern in radio frequencies, specific numbers that, when broadcast at 3:33 a.m., seemed to open what he called auditory doorways. The final entry chilled me to my core. April 17, 1943. I found how to close the door. The entity requires 7 children to fully manifest, a symbolic number in many ancient beliefs. If the 7th child is prevented from crossing over, the door must close for another 40 years. I've identified the likely 7th child. God forgive me for what I must do to save the others. The journal ended there. According to newspaper archives, Dr. Pierce committed suicide the following day. The 7th child was never taken, and the 6 who disappeared were never found, but they were remembered. Unlike other cycles, where the town collectively seemed to forget the missing children within a year, the 1943 case remained in public memory. "He broke the pattern somehow," I murmured. Eleanor's face was grim. "5 children are gone now, Detective. You're running out of time to figure out how." As I left her office, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood turned to ice. A photo of Eleanor and me, taken from inside her office wall, showing us from an impossible angle. Below it, 2 words. She remembers. That night, Eleanor Blackwood died in a house fire. The official report cited electrical failure. All her research was destroyed, except for Dr. Pierce's journal, which I had taken with me. I identified the most likely targets for the 6th and 7th children and set up surveillance. Every home with a child between ages 6 and 9 received a police detail, though I told no one the full reason why. Who would believe me? The 6th child, Emma Chen, disappeared despite the officer parked outside her home. At exactly 3:33 a.m., all electronics in a 2-block radius failed simultaneously. By the time backup arrived, Emma was gone, with that same red crayon left behind. The officer swore he never left his post, never fell asleep. But the dashboard camera from his cruiser told a different story. For exactly 2 minutes, from 3:33 to 3:35 a.m., the officer appeared to be in a trance, staring at his rearview mirror while smiling vacantly. When I enhanced the mirror's reflection, I could see a red door where the back seat should have been. One more child. That's all the entity needed. I returned to Dr. Pierce's journal, poring over every page for anything I'd missed. On my 5th reading, I noticed faint impressions on the final page, words pressed from a page that had been torn out. I shaded over it with a pencil, revealing a partial message. Must be heard by the 7th child. The frequency disrupts the entity's call. 107.3 FM will. That night, I sat in 7-year-old Theo Walker's room, the child my analysis had identified as the most likely final target. His parents were downstairs, sedated enough to sleep but able to wake in an emergency. Every radio in the house was tuned to 107.3 FM, broadcasting white noise at a low volume. At 3:30 a.m., I felt a pressure change in the room, like the air before a storm. The walls seemed to pulse slightly. The radio static shifted, patterns emerging in the noise like music just beyond comprehension. 3:33 a.m. The static cleared for 1 second, and through it came children's voices in unison. "You can't stop us. We're already here." The walls began to bleed, not with blood, but with a viscous red substance that moved with purpose, forming that spiral door symbol across Theo's bedroom wall. The red crayon on his desk rolled across the surface, standing upright on its tip impossibly, and I heard the whispering. Dozens of voices calling Theo's name, promising wonders beyond the door, telling him they'd been waiting, that he was special, chosen. Theo sat up in bed, eyes open but unseeing. He began to walk toward the symbol on the wall, which was now rippling, deepening, becoming 3-dimensional. I grabbed him, pulled him back. "Theo, wake up." His small body was rigid, his skin ice cold. "They need me," he said in that same flat voice I'd heard on the recorder. "They'll give the others back if I go." The symbol on the wall was no longer a drawing. It was an actual door, red and ancient, with that spiral carved into its surface. It opened a crack, and through it, I glimpsed the missing children standing in a circle, holding hands around a figure composed entirely of static and shadow. I cranked the radio volume to maximum. The white noise blasted through the room, and the door on the wall shuddered. The children beyond it covered their ears. "Give them back," I shouted at the door, still holding Theo. "Whatever you are, they don't belong to you." The static figure moved forward, its form flickering like bad reception. When it spoke, I felt the words inside my skull rather than hearing them. "They opened the door themselves, Detective. Children always do when adults stop listening, but perhaps we can bargain. We need a 7th to complete the cycle, or the door closes for 40 more years. Take me instead, I said without hesitation. Let the children go and take me. The figure tilted what might have been its head. Adults are insufficient, used up, closed off. But you still hear us, still see us, perhaps ... The radio static changed pitch, becoming a high, keening sound that made my teeth vibrate. The door opened wider. Enter willingly, and 5 may leave. 1 must remain with you to anchor the door for the next cycle. Choose. Let Theo choose, I counted, my mind racing. If he's special enough to be your 7th, he's special enough to decide. The figure seemed to consider this. Finally, it gestured, and the door swung fully open. Beyond it was not a room, but a vast landscape of static, punctuated by impossible geometric shapes and fragments of radio broadcasts from across time. The 5 missing children turned toward us, their eyes now black pools reflecting that strange dimension. They stepped forward in unison, passing through the doorway and into Theo's bedroom, moving mechanically. Choose 1 to remain and enter yourself, or the bargain is void, the static figure intoned. Theo looked up at me, then at the children, his eyes clearing slightly. They're not all here, he said. There are more children behind the door, from before, many more. The static figure flickered violently. Choose now. In that moment, I understood what Dr. Pierce had realized in 1943. What broke the cycle wasn't preventing the 7th child. It was remembering. The entity fed on forgetting, on the town's collective amnesia that followed each cycle. I pulled the small voice recorder from my pocket, the one I'd been carrying since finding the first at the Torres home. I pressed record and handed it to Theo. Tell everyone what you see, I whispered to him. Make them remember. Theo took the recorder, his small face suddenly determined. He began to speak, describing the door, the static figure, the missing children from this cycle and glimpses of those from cycles past. The static figure lunged forward, but couldn't seem to cross the threshold while Theo spoke into the recorder. The door began to waver, its edges becoming indistinct. Everyone needs to hear, I said, pulling out my phone and starting a live stream to the police department's social media account. I pointed it at the doorway, at the children, at the raging static figure beyond. Everyone needs to remember. The door slammed shut with a force that knocked us all to the ground. The red symbol melted down the wall, pooling on the floor before evaporating into nothing. The 5 children collapsed like puppets with cut strings. In the silence that followed, Theo looked up at me. Did we win? I didn't know how to answer him then. I'm still not sure now. The 5 recovered children remembered nothing of their time beyond the door. Medical examinations showed no physical harm, though all displayed brainwave patterns typically only seen in deep meditation. They drew the same pictures, that red spiral door, but now closed, with a heavy lock drawn across it. But the entity had spoken the truth about one thing. The bargain required payment. The 6th child, Emma Chen, was never found. And sometimes, late at night, I hear her voice in the static between radio stations. The recordings spread across the internet despite official attempts to label them a hoax. Millions heard Theo's description, saw the glimpse of that impossible door in my shaky live stream footage. For the first time in the town's history, the missing children became a national story, their names and faces known far beyond our borders. Something tells me that matters, that being remembered is somehow keeping the door locked. But locks can be picked, doors can be reopened, and sometimes, at exactly 3:33 a.m., my radio turns itself on. Through the static, I hear Emma Chen's voice, no longer flat but urgent, frightened. It's finding another way in, through the signals, through the screens everyone watches. It's learning to open smaller doors in many places instead of one big door here. Detective Reeves, it remembers you. It knows your name. It knows you can hear it. I've installed signal jammers in my home. I've covered every screen, disconnected every speaker. But in this connected world, how long can anyone truly stay isolated? The whispers are getting louder. The static is spreading. Last night, at 3:33 a.m., I woke to find my bedroom wall painted with a familiar red spiral. I didn't put it there. And this morning, my phone showed a new text message sent from my own number. A photo of me sleeping, taken from inside my wall, with 4 words. Look behind you, detective. I'm not sharing this story because I think you can save me. I'm sharing it because the more people who know, the harder it is for the entity to make us forget. The children need to be remembered. But I have to warn you, now that you know, you might start hearing it too. In the walls, in the static, at 3:33 a.m. If you do, whatever you do, don't open the red door. What is the entity behind the red door? Why does it need exactly 7 children every 40 years? And most chillingly, what happens when the next cycle begins in a world where our children are surrounded by screens and signals every waking moment? What do you think happened to Emma Chen? Is she truly lost forever? Or is she trying to warn us about something worse coming? Comment below with your theories about the red door and what might be waiting behind it. In our next video, we'll explore the evidence Detective Reeves has gathered about previous cycles and the disturbing pattern of technical difficulties affecting anyone who shares this story too widely. What do you think the entity is planning next?